Let's show an example of sharing topics with both Kafka and Pulsar producers and Kafka and Pulsar consumers. So I assume you already have your code set up for the Kafka producer and the Kafka consumer. So here's the producer code. I've just made an edit to it, so there's a for loop here. It'll produce 10 messages, but it'll say hello from Kafka. Let me go ahead and produce that. Produce those 10 messages. And then I've edited my consumer code to print out those messages and say consumed by Kafka. Let me go ahead and execute that. You've already seen both of these examples. I've just edited it slightly so it's very clear that it's produced and consumed by Kafka. So there it says consumed by Kafka. Let's now share this topic with both a Pulsar producer and a Pulsar consumer. There's example code in the UI that I'm going to go grab, and we're going to put that in here and point it to the same topics and show you what happens. So in the UI, I've gone to Pulsar clients here on the left, and code libraries, we're going to be using the Java code. Click Next. I'm going to be using the same service account that already has produce and consume messages on our tenant and namespace. I don't need to download the OAuth 2 key. I already have it in a folder on the desktop, and I'll show you where to edit the code to reference that file. Here you need to add one property and a dependency into your POM file, and then of course update your code or update your project to use those. I'm not going to show where to do that. I've already done that over in IntelliJ. Next I go to produce and consume. I'm going to select my tenant, my namespace. I'm going to select the topic that we were using with the consumer or the producer and the consumer. It was my first Kafka client. And then the subscription for our consumer, we're going to edit once we get that code into IntelliJ. These are called SN Producer and SN Consumer. I'm going to copy both of them over to IntelliJ, and then I'll show you what they look like over there. And here I am in IntelliJ, and I've copied in that code for both SN Producer and SN Consumer, making sure to have package org.example at the top. First thing I need to do is update the key file path in both files, making sure to keep the file : and 3 forward slashes at the beginning. So go to the Kafka producer, go ahead and copy that out here. In the producer, just need to paste that in here, making sure again to keep file with 3 forward slashes. And consumer, same thing. And then for our producer, we had from Kafka, it said hello from Kafka, and then the message was with the integer. So let's say hello from Pulsar in our producer. So we'll say hello from Pulsar with that integer appended, and then where we print out the message, I'm going to go ahead and delete this and just say print the message out. And then for the consumer on the Kafka side, we had receive record and then consumed by Kafka. So we'll say received record, just to make it all consistent and look nice. Oops. Record and consumed by Pulsar. Go ahead and close this. The only other thing I need to do in my consumer is use or edit my subscription name. I'm not recommending you do this, but I'm just going to show you what happens for now when you use the same name for defining your consumer group, which was my first consumer in Kafka. And then your consumer over here, I'm going to use the same name, and you'll see that they actually are independent from each other. And one additional change I want to make to the consumer is I want to make it consume more than 10 messages. So as we do our test, to keep it running, we'll say it consume up to 10,000 messages before it shuts down. Let's test out the Pulsar producer by executing SN producer. So it says hello from Pulsar 0 through 9. And then we'll start up the consumer and make sure that one's working as well. As you see, it actually consumes the Kafka messages that we had sent, hello from Kafka, consumed by Pulsar, and then we get the hello from Pulsar, consumed by Pulsar. For our producers, let's get these things going. Let's do 10,000 messages from Pulsar. And then for Kafka, let's also have it produce 10,000 messages. So you can really see what happens when you start producing and consuming simultaneously. So I'm going to start up the Kafka producer first. So I'm going to just close this SN consumer. So we're now sending messages from Kafka. I'm going to also send from Pulsar, and we'll put these side by side. Okay. Next, I'm going to consume with Kafka. And you can see it's actually Kafka's consuming messages from both Pulsar and Kafka. And then I'm going to consume from Pulsar. So we have an example here where on the far left, we're producing with Kafka. In the next column, we're producing from Pulsar. In the third column, we're consuming with Kafka, and we're getting both messages from Kafka and Pulsar. And then in the far right, we are consuming from Pulsar, and we're getting both messages from Kafka and Pulsar. Both Pulsar and Kafka can consume messages regardless of where they're produced from. And even if you happen to use the same subscription name and consumer group name, they're considered independent, so both will get all messages. Here in the UI, I've gone to my tenant and namespace and clicked on topics. And if I click on my first Kafka client, you'll see that I have two producers, but only one subscription shows up. This is the subscription that corresponds to the Pulsar consumer. Kafka consumer group will have to see through the CLI, which I do show in a separate video.